Too sweet to survive, a disaster that smelled like breakfast, the Great Molasses Flood of 1919. This is Liam. Welcome to my channel. What do you think is the stickiest way to die? Imagine you're walking through your city on a mild winter afternoon. The streets are noisy with delivery wagons, kids are playing, you're on your lunch break, maybe holding a sandwich in one hand, tipping your hat to a neighbor with the other. Now imagine hearing a thunderous rumble, followed by a wall of syrup crashing down your street at 35 miles per hour. Sounds like a fever dream, right? But that's exactly what happened in Boston. A giant wave tore through the city's north end, destroying buildings, flipping over train cars, and dragging horses and people alike into the street. But it wasn't water, or fire, or even snow. It was molasses. Thick, sticky, brown molasses. You know, the stuff you drizzle on pancakes. Over 2 million gallons of it burst out of a steel tank and roared down city streets like a freight train made of syrup. It sounds absurd, but this was very real and very deadly. In this episode, we're diving into the bizarre, tragic, and oddly hilarious story of the Great Molasses Flood. A disaster so strange it almost feels like a joke. Except it wasn't. That sounds like it came out of a children's book written by a madman. A giant wave tore through the city's north end, destroying buildings, flipping over train cars, and dragging horses and people alike into the street. But it wasn't water, or fire, or even snow. Let's go back to January 15th, 1919. To understand how this could happen, we need to rewind. Boston in 1919 was a gritty, growing, full-throttle American city. It had one foot planted in the industrial past and the other stepping cautiously into the modern world. The First World War had just ended, and the city was adjusting to peace, if you could call it that. Veterans were returning home. Labor strikes were common. Racial and ethnic tensions simmered under the surface, especially in immigrant-heavy neighborhoods like the North End. Boston was a working-class town in every sense, loud, crowded, and always moving. People worked hard. Dock workers unloaded ships along the waterfront. Factory workers spent long shifts making shoes, bricks, rope, or soap. Horse-drawn carts still clattered down cobblestone streets, but automobiles were starting to weave in between them. Smoke puffed from chimneys, mixing with the smell of baked bread, fish, and coal. Noise was constant. Whistles, bells, shouting kids, trolley cars screeching at corners. Housing was tight. Immigrant families packed into multi-story buildings, often sharing rooms to make ends meet. Washing hung from lines across alleyways. Neighbors leaned out of windows to talk, trade news, or pass food across the sills. People knew each other. It was noisy, tight-knit, and resilient. And what did people do for fun? It wasn't all work and soot. Locals gathered at pubs or soda fountains. Kids played stickball in the streets. In the evenings, families might listen to phonographs or attend vaudeville shows. Baseball was the sport of choice, and if you were lucky enough to afford a ticket, catching a Red Sox game was a real treat. Boston, in 1919, it was a place on the edge of change, an industrial storm of smoke, sweat, and ambition. No one could have guessed that something as innocent as molasses would soon turn this busy city into a surreal disaster zone. The North End, where our story takes place, was a busy, working-class neighborhood, home to many Italian immigrants. Factories, wharves, and warehouses lined the streets. It was gritty, crowded, and loud. And in the middle of all this hustle sat a massive steel tank owned by the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, or USIA. Let's meet the monster tank. From the moment the tank went up in 1915, it was trouble. The tank was rushed into service by the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, or USIA, at the height of World War I. With the demand for industrial alcohol skyrocketing, especially for munitions and wartime manufacturing, the company didn't want delays. Instead of thorough testing or engineering oversight, they chose speed. The result? A massive steel tank that was essentially held together with hope. From the outside, it seemed impressive, 50 feet high, 90 feet wide, capable of holding over 2 million gallons of molasses. But the problems began almost immediately. It leaked badly. So badly that children would come with cups to scoop molasses straight off the ground as it oozed from the seams like something out of a cartoon. Locals joked that the tank moaned when full, making eerie groaning noises like a metal beast about to give out. But this was no joke. The steel used was thinner than standard for a tank of that size. The rivets were poorly installed, and critical safety measures like pressure testing were completely skipped. The company even hired a man with no engineering license to sign off on the structure. And when complaints came in, USIA didn't fix the leaks. They painted the tank brown to hide the stains. This was Boston's North End in 1919, an immigrant-heavy, working-class neighborhood where complaints didn't carry much weight. Between anti-immigrant sentiment and corporate indifference, few people in power took the locals seriously. And though residents pointed out the creeks, the moans, the molasses puddles, no one expected the disaster that was coming. But the warning signs were there. They had always been there. And soon, the tank would do exactly what people feared. It would give out. And when it did, it wouldn't just spill, it would destroy. January 15, 1919, started out unremarkably in Boston's North End. It was around lunchtime, and the streets were busy. Dock workers hauled cargo. Kids played by the wharves. Horses clopped through narrow alleys, pulling carts. The air was unusually warm for mid-January, nearly 40 degrees after a bitter cold stretch. People were chatting about the change in weather. Some were out without their heavy coats. For just a moment it felt like spring. At 12:40 p.m., everything changed. Witnesses later described hearing a strange metallic groan. It was deep, echoing like the sound of a ship straining in high tide. Some thought it was an elevated train derailing. Then came a thunderous roar. The massive molasses tank at 529 Commercial Street split open with a blast so loud it shook the ground. Rivets fired through the air like bullets. And then, chaos. A wave of thick, brown molasses, 25 feet tall, 160 feet wide, burst forth, moving at an astonishing 35 miles per hour. It smashed into buildings with the force of a freight train. Entire walls buckled. Wooden structures were ripped from their foundations. A firehouse was swept off its base and collapsed into itself. At first, people froze in confusion. They thought it was a bomb, a gas explosion, something from the war. But then they saw it, an unstoppable wall of syrup crashing through the streets. Panic set in. People ran, but it was too late. The molasses engulfed them. Some were knocked off their feet and pulled under. Others were pinned against debris, stuck fast in the rising sludge. Horses screamed, trapped in place, unable to move. And then, just as quickly, the molasses slowed. It cooled and thickened, trapping everything in place. People, animals, debris, even a wagon or two, as if time had frozen. Rescue workers arrived almost immediately, but the conditions were surreal. They couldn't walk. They had to wade through knee-deep molasses. Breathing was hard. Moving was harder. Some victims wouldn't be found for days, buried beneath the sweet, suffocating weight of industrial negligence. The cleanup was hell. Molasses doesn't just wash away. Crews spent weeks hosing down the streets with salt water and sand. They tried scrubbing it off bricks, prying it out of alleyways, and even pouring boiling water in some places to thin it out. But it clung to everything like a sugary curse. Every step was a squelch. Every surface felt like the bottom of a pancake griddle. City workers accidentally tracked it through City Hall, leaving footprints on polished marble floors. Horses left sticky hoof prints down entire blocks. Reporters wrote that when people sat down, their pants stuck to benches and chairs. Residents claimed they kept molasses footprints in their homes for weeks. Even their laundry came out smelling like a breakfast diner. The stickiness didn't stop at the harbor either. Trains ran late because the molasses gummed up the tracks. Delivery wagons had to be scrubbed down with vinegar. Even dogs refused to walk through certain areas. Boston Harbor ran brown for months. And in the North End, residents swore for decades afterward that on hot summer days, when the breeze was just right, the sweet, sour scent of molasses would drift through the air like a ghost of breakfast past. 21 people died. Over 150 were injured. It wasn't just sticky, it was catastrophic, and also just a little absurd. So, how did they finally clean it up? Well, it wasn't elegant. Crews brought in salt water from Boston Harbor and sprayed it through hoses to loosen the molasses. Boiling water was used to thin it out. where it had hardened into tar-like globs. Sand was shoveled across streets to give people and horses traction. Firefighters, dock workers, and even neighborhood volunteers joined in. It took over 87,000 man-hours to clear the mess. Entire streets had to be scrubbed by hand. It was back-breaking, sticky work. By the time it was done, Boston had basically invented the first molasses disaster response unit. At first, USIA blamed anarchists. It may sound far-fetched now, but this was the Red Scare era, just months after World War I had ended. Fear of political radicals, especially anarchists and communists, was rampant in the United States. Several bombings had shaken cities like New York and Washington. Labor strikes were erupting nationwide. People were nervous, suspicious, and quick to point fingers. And in neighborhoods like Boston's North End, where many Italian immigrants lived and worked, suspicion was often aimed squarely at outsiders. Immigrants were frequently blamed for social unrest, whether they had anything to do with it or not. So when the molasses tank exploded, USIA seized the moment. They claimed anarchists had sabotaged the tank. No evidence, just speculation, wrapped in the fears of the time. But investigators weren't buying it. It didn't take long to uncover the truth. The tank had been poorly built from the beginning. No pressure testing, steel that was too thin, rivets that didn't hold. All signs pointed not to sabotage, but to corporate negligence. And in the end, the courts agreed. This became one of the earliest and most significant cases of corporate liability in the U.S. After 5 years of legal battles, USIA was ordered to pay over $600,000 in damages, roughly $10 million in today's money. A trial that changed history. The trial lasted 5 years and featured 1,500 pages of testimony. Engineers, eyewitnesses, and survivors all took the stand. The case became a landmark in holding companies responsible for negligence. It helped lay the groundwork for future safety regulations and corporate accountability. In a strange twist, molasses, once used to make bombs during the war, sparked a revolution in civil law. Today, the Great Molasses Flood is both a warning and a punchline. Boston has a plaque where the tank once stood. Locals still tell the story with a mix of disbelief and pride. It's tragic, bizarre, and unforgettable. It taught the nation about engineering, about oversight, about what happens when companies cut corners. But it also gave us something uniquely Boston. A disaster that smells like breakfast. And hey, molasses isn't the only absurd disaster in history. There was the London beer flood of 1814, when a vat burst and flooded the streets with thousands of gallons of beer. Or the Great Emu War in Australia, where soldiers with machine guns lost to a bunch of giant birds. There's even the Boston Molasses Flood's distant cousin, the 1919 soda pop explosion in Nebraska, where bottles blew up from the heat and injured several people. History isn't just full of wars and kings. Sometimes it's sticky, sometimes it's frothy, and sometimes it's just downright ridiculous. So the next time you drizzle molasses on your pancakes, remember that syrup once flattened a neighborhood. It's sweet, it's sticky, and in 1919, it was deadly. History has floods of all kinds, but only one was this deliciously ridiculous. And if you liked this story, let me know in the comments what weird disaster you want me to cover next, because I promise, we've only scratched the surface of history's weirdest moments. If you've made it this far, it means you're enjoying the story. If you're interested in more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a great story. This is Liam. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.